This is Hobby Talks, a podcast series exploring politics and policy-focused conversations with experts, scholars, and those guiding the most complex issues facing our region and state. This podcast is a production from the Hobby School of Public Affairs in partnership with the Center for Student Media at the University of Houston. In this episode, Hobby Talks host Jim Granado discusses the inner workings of city government with Houston City Council member Alejandra Salinas.
So welcome to Hobby Talks. I'm your host, Jim Granado, Dean of the Hobby School of Public Affairs at the University of Houston. I'm joined by the newest at-large member of the Houston City Council, Alejandra Salinas. Councilmember Salinas won a special election in December 2025, succeeding Letitia Plummer, who stepped down to run for Harris County Judge. She is the first LGBTQ Latina elected to serve on the Houston City Council. A native of Laredo, Salinas developed an early interest in public service. As a student, she served as president of the College Democrats of America and spoke at the 2012 Democratic National Convention. In addition to her work in public office, Councilmember Salinas is an attorney and a partner in Sussman Godfrey. Welcome, Council Member.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
Okay, so you're in about 3 months. What aspects of the office have been most rewarding, and what has surprised you the most about the day-to-day work?
I think the most rewarding piece is when we get to actually get things done to make the city better. So one of the first things when I got into office was a vote that was coming up on paying a vendor that had pled guilty to illegal bribery of the city. And there was a question as to whether or not we had to pay that vendor. And it was coming up for a vote, and I tagged the item. And I work closely with our city attorney's office to dig into the contract to see, is there room to push back to say that we don't have to pay? I was glad to work with the mayor's administration and city legal. They pulled the item and have been negotiating internally to try to ensure that we don't, in fact, have to make the payment. And so that was just sort of a small step. It's meaningful because it's ensuring that our taxpayer dollars are not going to waste. And that's the thing. Those are the things that I'm focused on every day. Is how do we come into the office every day and make a meaningful impact for Houstonians, whether it be saving them money, but also making sure that the resources we do have are being spent most efficiently and effectively to make Houston better for everyone.
There's also an element of justice to that, too. I mean, why would we want to give money to someone that's committed crimes? So, yeah.
Exactly.
How does your work and background as an attorney and community advocate translate to your policy agenda at City Hall?
I think I've benefited in so many ways from that background. You know, as a trial lawyer at Sussman Godfrey, I learned how to be an effective advocate. I learned when to fight, when the fight's worth it, and how to be strategic, and always focusing on the end goal of achieving our end result. And I'm trying to take all those lessons of understanding when to fight, when to build consensus to City Hall. And so far, it's proven to be very useful. And certainly the community advocacy piece, I talked a lot on the campaign about wanting to build coalitions. And as folks may have seen when I announced my very first Proposition A, I stood with over 25 community organizations, and now we're up to over 50 community organizations that are standing behind us on this immigration bill. I believe policymaking has to be done with community. With community organizations, folks that are on the ground. It shouldn't come from the top down. And I'm so grateful to those folks that have been willing to work alongside us. And I hope we continue to do that throughout my tenure in office.
Let's talk about that a little bit. You and two colleagues recently proposed an immigration ordinance to increase transparency around how local law enforcement interacts with ICE. How are you thinking about balancing public safety, legal constraints, and community trust?
Yeah, so, you know, one of the top issues I got asked about on the campaign was ICE and what the city of Houston is doing about it. And obviously there are a lot of limitations. ICE does not answer to the city of Houston. It's a federal apparatus. And so there's only so much we can do to try to limit the horrific effects that it's having across this country, but also here in the city of Houston. And so when I got into office, I looked around and I wanted to see what can the city of Houston do. So I had a lot of conversations with HPD to really understand what the interactions were looking like, what the collaboration was looking like, and then got to talking to all those community groups to understand what can we do to improve the current state of things. Because for me, I want to go to bed knowing that we are doing the bare minimum under what's required under state law. And by the state law, I'm referring to SB 4, which unfortunately says that no city can pass a law that prohibits or materially limits immigration enforcement in Texas. So understanding with those constraints, what could the city of Houston do? And what we came up with, I think, a very thoughtful and well-reasoned and legal proposal that so many other major Texas jurisdictions have taken. The original proposal had three pieces. One, it created discretion for officers to decide whether or not to call ICE on what's referred to as a civil administrative warrant. A civil administrative warrant is not signed by a federal judge. It's not evaluated by any third party. It is simply something ICE just issues on its own accord. And this should not, in my view, in the view of many cities and courts, have the same weight of a warrant that is a criminal warrant that is signed by a federal judge that requires probable cause and has that third party evaluating whether or not it is sufficient. Because of this stark difference between administrative warrants and civil warrants, Bexar County, Austin, and Dallas have all taken steps to empower their officers to have discretion or told them to not call at all. So the first part of our proposal would have enabled officers to have that discretion. The second piece is all about just following the Fourth Amendment, which is when the lawful purpose of the stop ends, the stop has to end. If I pull you over to give you a traffic ticket, once I give you that ticket, I can't just hold you for some indiscriminate amount of time. I have to let you go. Right now, unfortunately, that is not HPD's policy. HPD's current policy is we're going to wait for up to 30 minutes for ICE to arrive. It's not what the Fourth Amendment says. And so the second part of the proposed ordinance would just codify the Fourth Amendment and is also an action that Austin and Bexar County have taken in response to what we're seeing around ICE. And the third part of the proposal is just rebuilding trust through transparency. So public reporting about how our tax dollars are being spent, how often HPD is contacting ICE, how long is the stop, the purpose of the stop, and if that person is in fact being handed over to ICE. Basic public reporting, Austin passed it many years ago after the passage of SB4. And again, it just allows us to know how our tax dollars are being used to assist ICE operations. Now, after we announced the proposed ordinance that had the backing of more than 25 community organizations when we announced it, the city attorney issued a legal memo where he deemed the first part of the ordinance regarding administrative warrants unlawful, but said the second two parts were lawful and could proceed for a vote by the full city council. I strongly disagree with the city attorney on that first opinion regarding administrative warrants, and we are going to vigorously fight that opinion. But first, we have an opportunity to get something meaningfully done on these other two items. They will go for a vote next Wednesday, April 8th, by the full city council. And now that we're up to more than 50 organizations, including the Texas AFL-CIO, the Houston Area Urban League, Super Neighborhoods, faith leaders, so many other groups, I'm hopeful that my colleagues will join on and do the right thing and pass this ordinance next week.
So it sounds like the big thing for you, though, you made a statement about the Fourth Amendment, but it's the civil administrative warrants that you really want to see reformed and dealt with. Is that correct?
I think all of it is incredibly important.
Okay.
I think it's just as important that we follow the Fourth Amendment and that, again, our tax dollars aren't being wasted while HPD is just waiting around for ICE. HPD has so many obligations as it is. Why are we adding this unnecessary one of having them sit on the side of the road and wait for an ICE officer to arrive? It's not a good use of taxpayer resources, and it's not compatible with the Fourth Amendment. Let's follow the law and let's put those officers back to work to keep us safe.
So this leads into the next question. So city government often requires collaboration across council offices, departments, and community stakeholders. What have you learned about building coalitions and working across perspectives to advance initiatives? I mean, and you can use this as an example because it looks like you're going to have a vote now. You've already worked with the community, and you've probably been talking extensively with colleagues who clearly know your arguments here. So how's it all going? How's it working out so far? Are you confident?
I'm hopeful. I'm okay. Very hopeful that the ordinance will pass. And, I think you always have to go with an open mind and be ready to listen. I think the best conversations start from a place of listening to the other person's perspective, understanding where they are coming from, and speaking to those values. And I think when you have those conversations, that's when you learn about our common goals or our common values. I remember Councilmember Twyla Carter was so generous with her time to have breakfast with me a few weeks into my tenure. And, Councilmember Carter and I probably don't agree on a lot of things, but she was so kind to share her background and her story and her experiences. And we learned that we have, several, experiences in common of growing up. And even though we may not always agree, I think we both got to really see each other and understand where the other person's coming from and find some shared values. And I think having more of those conversations with all types of people is very important to do. But I'm obviously a very proud Democrat, but I want to get things done. And I think having more conversations, understanding where people are coming from, understanding who they are as people, getting to know someone's family, getting to know what means something to them, is how we build a foundation to build collaboration across this government.
Yeah, we're in the relationship business, whether it's in public office or even in academia. I mean,
That's right.
It's job one. So many residents care about what's happening in the communities, but may not regularly follow city news or be civically engaged. So how are you working to make local government more accessible, and how do you ensure that different voices are part of the conversation?
Yeah, so accessibility and transparency is a very important issue for me. One of the things that our office has started is the short City Hall 101 videos, where we are trying to demystify and explain some of the processes and procedures of what exactly happens at City Hall. So we started by explaining what exactly a city council member does, that we pass laws, that we vote on budgets, that we oversee departments and help ensure that things are being run as effectively and efficiently as possible. And I can't tell you how many people said, I had never heard it explained that well way before. That makes a lot of sense. We did another where we explained how you could sign up to come to speak at City Council for public session. We explained that you could come speak on any topic and the process by which you sign up. And again, folks have said, I didn't know that's the way it worked. So we're trying to think of all sorts of ways to make government, particularly City Hall, more accessible and transparent. And we're also working on a number of hope soon to be propositions to take some steps to make government a little bit more accessible to folks. But I think it's so important because the work we're doing here is exciting and it's so impactful. On the campaign trail, I often said, City Hall and local government is the government that affects us most because it's the street you drive down, it's the water you drink, it's the police you interact with, it's the government right outside your door. And so people should, have the ability to access it and be a part of it as much as they can. I've loved evening session where hundreds of Houstonians will come and share their perspective. I can imagine how difficult it would be to come to public session during the middle of the day. We should be doing more evening sessions. We should be doing public session out in the community, doing as much as we can to make government as accessible to folks that want to participate, but also provide information out there so they can stay abreast of what's going on at City Hall among all the things they have going on throughout their day.
Yeah, it's city governments and local governments where the rubber meets the road, but you do operate within a state and national political landscape. So how does those outside actors influence your approach to decision making at City Hall?
Well, I think there's a lot of lessons in what not to do. And there's also some lessons in what to do. And I try to take both as best as I can. Yes, there is a reality that we have, the president right now that we do. And I think it is incumbent on us as local officials to speak out, when necessary, to say what is happening is wrong and to resist and fight back, when we need to. And when it comes to the state government, there's a lot of resources that the city depends on from the state government. And so they are a partner that we have to collaborate with. But at the same time, we have to stand up for Houstonians. And when something that the state government or the federal government is doing is wrong, we need to say as much. But we have to always learn how to strike that balance. That's certainly something that I'm very cognizant of. And I know the voters expect us to do. But it's all about striking that balance of understanding that we have to work with our state and federal partners, but also standing up and saying what we need to when our city demands it.
Shift focus to our students. First of all, I want to thank you for meeting with our CHIP interns and doing Q&A and just talking about your experiences. I mean, you did it what? You were only here you're in office only 2 months and you did that. So thank you very much.
Of course.
So the curriculum and training at the Hobby School emphasizes strong quantitative / data analysis. In what ways do you see data drive your policy decisions and solutions?
I believe data is everything. I think on so many issues, it's so easy to get lost in anecdotes or sort of sentiment about something. And it's always about coming back to the data. So from everything to how we should be building our roads, to how we should be spending our dollars on police overtime versus hiring new cadets, there is always a number and data that we can point back to see whether the policy is working or not. And we all need to be held to those objective standards. There's policies that I may believe in, but if the data says otherwise, you have to follow the data. And I know that as a trial lawyer. Oftentimes when I'm litigating a case, we have to bring in the experts, and the experts are going to educate us on what the science says on a particular topic. And making sure that you're always consulting the experts, always having those conversations, pulling in as much information as you can to make the most informed decision. That's how I've always worked as a trial lawyer. That's how I worked as a community organizer when I was a student. That's the kind of public servant I tend to be, and certainly have tried to be since I've been in office. And I hope and I believe that all of my colleagues will do the same. But we always have to operate from a place of fact.
So Houston, like many large cities, is facing a challenging fiscal environment. It requires difficult decisions on spending priorities. Major cities are on the front lines of complex policy challenges such as homelessness and the rising cost of housing, and that's just to name two. From your perspective on the city council, how do you identify where local government can make the greatest impact?
Gosh, I think there's so many things that we can do to have an impact. Obviously, how we are spending, the taxpayers' dollars is critical. And I think all options need to be on the table. And, if families are expected to balance their budget, the city of Houston should be held to no different standard. But I think we also need to be really thoughtful about, the power of the purse that the city has. We spend a lot of money on contractors and vendors throughout the city, making sure that we're spending those dollars as equitably as possible and spending those dollars with partners that treat their workers fairly, and that we're making sure that we're investing in the diversity that is our incredible city. And so I think there's opportunities certainly with our budget and the dollars that we spend to improve the city, but also using our regulatory power on things like illegal dumping and making sure that we're being as efficient and effective as possible on some of those fronts. But there's so many ways that the city can make a profound positive impact on the community. And I know there's a lot of good folks working incredibly hard at the city to do so. And we're just trying as best as we can to elevate those voices to get those good things done.
Okay, this is a two-part question. The first part is, when did you get the bug to do these things? Were you in grammar school, high school? I mean, were there mentors? Was it family? What got you to start pursuing a career like this? And what's your advice to our students on how to make a difference in public service? So two-parter.
Yeah, so my start in politics was in high school. It was 2004, or I guess no, it was 2006, and George Bush had proposed at the time an immigration bill that was quite controversial. It included a provision that would have made it a felony to anyone who aided or abetted an undocumented immigrant. And growing up on the border, as you can imagine, that provision would have a profound impact on my community. And although there were students all across the country that were staging walkouts from their school and there were mass protests, nothing was really happening in my hometown. And I don't quite know why, but I just felt incumbent on me that if no one was going to do it, I had to do it. And so even though I was this really nerdy debate kid who had never done anything political like that before, I decided that I wanted to organize a walkout to bring awareness to this bill to my community. And so I got to organizing and talked to the football players and the cheerleaders and everyone. And we sort of got a consensus of folks that were ready to go and walk out. The principal learned about it and dragged me in her office and threatened to suspend me and kick me out of all of my honors and clubs. But I was sort of ready and willing to do it. But we ended up negotiating a deal where I would call off the walkout, but in exchange, there would be a school-wide forum in the middle of a school day where students could come and speak for or against the immigration bill. And it was this great event. Hundreds of students attended, and students spoke for and against the bill, and it achieved the exact result I wanted, which was raising awareness about this bill. And that experience, it lit me up. What I loved about it was that I was able to help empower my peers to see the power of their voice in this American democracy. And I just thought that's what I want to do. I want to help people find their voice and empower them. And that's when I fell in love with politics. And, obviously continue to do in college as a national president of the College Democrats of America, worked on a presidential campaign in between my federal clerkship and coming to Sussman-Godfrey, served on the Democratic National Committee, and loved all of those experiences. And I'd been focused for the past, 8-9 years being a lawyer and now a partner at Sussman-Godfrey. But after Trump got reelected, I turned to my wife and we just said we wanted to do more than just donate and volunteer. And so we looked around and said, how can we best serve? And we felt like City Hall was really the place to do it because, again, it's the government that impacts us most. It's the government with a Democratic majority, and we felt like we could really get things done to help the city and hopefully push back against this notion that our president espouses that government is bad. I think if we can show people that government can do good at the local level, we can help start rebuilding that trust. To answer your second question as to what is it my advice to folks to how to get involved? Was that the question?
Yes.
I would say two things. One, follow your passions and, whatever that may be, follow it, learn about it, get educated, and sort of be willing to kind of do all kinds of work. When I started in politics, it was, the knocking on doors and it was talking to voters and learning politics from that sort of ground level up. It's the best education. And I think being open to those experiences will help teach you sort of the real grassroots of how to be a good political organizer. But I think also just being open to opportunities. I never thought when I was, in high school or even in college that one day I'd be running for the Houston City Council. But that opportunity arose, and I'm so grateful that it did. But it arose at the right time for me. So I would say be open to opportunities and know that you have your whole life ahead of you to pursue politics. You don't have to do it all right now. If you want to do it right now, fantastic. But if you want to go have a career and then come back to it like I did, you can do that as well. There's always going to be an opportunity to do good work. Pursue it when it's right for you and your family. And know that there will be people like me always happy to have a phone call to explain how I got into the process and how I can be helpful to you. I can't tell you how many people I've met on the campaign that say, I want to talk about law school. I want to talk about being a lawyer or getting into politics. And my door is always open. If anyone's listening and wants to have that conversation with me, call my office. We'll set up a call. We'll set up a coffee. Would be more than happy to talk to you about your experiences, what you're interested in doing, and how, if anything, we can do to be helpful. But don't be afraid to ask, volunteer. One of my first internships in college was interning for the chair of the Democratic Party. I didn't know anyone in DC, certainly not the chair. I just put my name forward. But you can't be afraid to do that. You can't be afraid of the rejection. By not applying, you're ensuring rejection. So please make sure you put your name out there, go for the opportunities. Sometimes they're going to work out, sometimes they're not, but at least you put yourself out there. And I promise you, doing that more often than not is going to be a good thing.
I have to ask another question now that you've said this. So you were a junior in high school when you had this epiphany? Is that what we call that?
Basic, yeah.
Yeah, so you're a junior in high school. So I want to know, you got called to the principal's office. So there's the, the authorities coming down on you and you've got to be a little nervous. What did your family think of this?
Like everything I think I've done in politics, my family was nervous for me. And they were like, are you sure? Are you sure? And when I answered the fourth, are you sure? They're like, okay, we love you and we got you. And that's the way it was when I decided to run for college Dems and when I wanted to run for office and all the things I've done in politics. They've always just said, are you sure? And I'm like, yes, I prayed about it. And I'm sure. And they were behind me. And I could not do this without my family. Yeah. My dad has been my biggest champion. If anyone was involved in my campaign, they would know my dad well. He was out there with me, knocking on doors, talking to voters. And he's just a very proud, Mexican papa. And I just love him so much. And I wouldn't be doing any of this if it weren't for him. So I'm just so grateful to have a family that's always supported me and asked me, are you sure? And then when I said yes, stood very strongly behind me.
Is your dad are you the first time college student in your family, or was your dad a college student?
No, I'm a third generation college student. Okay. My grandmother went to Texas Women's University, and my grandfather went to Texas A&M, and then went on to be a colonel in the U.S. Air Force.
Wow.
So yeah, no, I sometimes get asked that question. I always love to tell them, no, I'm a third generation college student.
But you went to UT, not A&M. That must have caused some friction, right?
It did. It did. He's also a very strong Republican. So, they used to joke that I spoke at the Republican National Convention.
Which is also an amazing story too, because you said this, what you did in high school, that's 2006. 6 years later, you're speaking at the Democratic National Convention. That's quite a journey.
No, it was a wonderful experience. I actually came out as LGBTQ in my speech at the convention. And I thought I was being clever by saying I'm an LGBT Latina. I thought my abuelita won't know what LGBT means. But the next day, the papers wrote stories about me. And the first line in the paper was, she's young, gay, and Hispanic. Everything President Obama would want in a surrogate. And so all my family starts calling me and saying, Mijita, the San Antonio Express says you're gay. What does this mean? I said, it means I'm gay. And that's how I came out to most of my family.
Surprise.
Surprise. But it was totally worth it, because that night when I left the arena, these kids came up to me and they said, because this is 2012, marriage equality is still being debated.
Yeah.
It wasn't quite where we're at today. And these kids said, I can't believe you said that you're LGBT. I'm going to tell my parents about myself tomorrow.
Wow.
And it was like, that's why visibility matters. That's why it is so important to have a diverse array of folks, in leadership and in those roles, because it helps people feel seen and know that they can live, their true lives. So I'll never forget that kid that came up to me that night. But no, that experience was remarkable, and I'm so grateful to the folks that made it possible. And I've been so blessed through all these things in politics to have had these opportunities. And I want to work so hard every day to live up to the opportunities I've been given.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this conversation. Thank you for your investment in the next generation of leaders and all that you're doing. And to our audience, we're grateful for your listenership. Stay tuned for more Hobby Talks episodes by visiting our website and social media platforms. Councilmember Salinas, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. This podcast represents the views of the guests and not of the University of Houston. The Center for Student Media provided sound and engineering support, and Soundcast Music provided the podcast song. The series is produced by the Communications and Marketing team at the Hobby School of Public Affairs. For more information on Hobby Talks, including past and upcoming episodes, visit uh.edu/hobby/hobbytalks.